So we're back at the Park Lake again today, and I'm taking it on with a super simple mono hair. I've pre-cut these and I'm not sure what length they're going to actually end up, but if I go from the bend of the hook to there, that's 24, 27, so they're pre-cut at 31. And we're going to be casting into silt. If the bottom was hard, I normally fish with 20 centimetre long rigs, but I'm just adding a few centimetres for the silt. I don't really know how deep the silt is, but I'm getting a soft thud at the range that I'm fishing. So I suspect that there could easily be 30, 50 centimetres of silt, but because I'm going to be feathering the cast and landing the rig, I'm very confident that this rig length is sufficient and it's not going to plug in. On the hook link front, we've got 25 pound 0.45 Armourline, so this is just bog standard mainline. It's not designed as a hook link material at all. The good news is that it makes a fantastic hook link material. I'm just reusing leftovers from my bulk 1000 metre spool after I spooled up. So this is free hook link material, that's how I view it. The knot I'm using is the half blood. Mega simple knot. It's probably the knot that every angler learns first. It goes up in a nice little taper like that, that's well cinched. And you'll note that there's no sinker, there's no anti-tangle tube, there's no nothing. It's just a half tuck blood onto a ring swivel, lightly semi-fixed inline running lead. That's a shoulder on there, so when we're casting this out, that lead is going to tend to want to pull that in like that. So this shoulder stops it getting sucked in too far. So this is why I'm using these inserts instead of the normal tail rubber. I could fish with that like that. We've got a bit of a kink down there. We've also got the kink where it's been on the board. So it's important that this is relatively straight for the cast so that it goes out completely tangle free. So I'm going to take the actual extra time to steam that. It also helps me get the exit position of the hair correct. That's where I want it exiting opposite the point. If you over pull on the mono hair, the hair is going to tend to turn around like that, which is not what we want. You can't cinch the knotless knot. It's not like a conventional knot. It doesn't respond to cinching. So this is the job of this little blowback tube. Could be a hair stop, anything like that, but all I do is pull it up until it's right, and then that helps fix it into position and stops it rotating so much. So to correct the kinks here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to put the rig puller actually into the bait leap of the hair rig, and then just by holding this under tension like this, I'll be able to steam a nice straight rig. And there we go. If we just leave it go cold for 30 seconds, we got a nice straight hair. So these are the baits that have been doing all the bites on this Park Lake. They're pre-dlugged, so these are not baits that I've dlugged myself. And I think they're a great option if you don't have the time or you've never done dlug baits. Now this is 0.45 mono, and you can see there's a fairly chunky overhand knot there, but I'm finding that these hook baits are robust enough so that they don't split open when I do that. If you were using a smaller bait or a more delicate bait or a heavier material, then there may well be a risk of splitting, and there's various different ways of solving that, of course, but that's working for me, so I can do it in the way that I would normally do it, which is the knot inside the bait. Now just put a simple little hair stop on there, pull it in, job's a good one. Now I've got two options here. I can just take that bait as is and dust it in there, and that'll give me a nice light little coating. It'll just dry it off, add extra flavour. That's some booster powder. Last couple of sessions what I've been doing a kind of double dip. So now that I've mounted that bait up, I'm going to re-dip it back in the dlug pot there, and then I'm going to dip it in there, and this is going to give me a thicker coating. This one tiny little bait is getting me bites. Now of course when this impacts the water, I know that bits are going to be breaking off it, but it leaves a scent trail of attraction right from where the lead slams in the water right down to the bottom. You know, the whole point of bait is to release soluble attraction into the water. I'm expecting things to fall off, break off, melt and dissolve. If a bait isn't breaking down and releasing soluble content into the water, then it's not a very good bait. If I was to use salt, it's exactly the same thing. I'm expecting little bits of salt to break off and then of course dissolve. That's what I want to happen. If it's not dissolving, then it's not creating attraction. There's no food signal for the carp to follow. That is a very strong food signal. It's also a food signal that lasts for many hours. Most of the takes here, I've left the rods in place for 10, 11 hours without touching them at all, and it's still strong enough for the carp to find it and to give me that bite. That's what I expect of a bait. So I've just had to tweak the hook point on that. It wasn't quite where I want it to be. So I've just gone through the rust preventative coating and the Teflon coating. So just a bit of hook grease. Oh, keep it razor sharp really, because without that they do go blunt. I've even got in the habit nowadays of greasing up unsharpened hook points because it just helps the hook go in cleaner and easier with less force. So every little helps. So in terms of rig length, if we go from the top of the bait, we've got 24 there, 27. That's what it's working out to be. Right, let's see how well we can get this one out. Feathered, trapped, soft thud. So it looks nothing in terms of range on a big water like this. It's still, I'm smacking that as hard as I can. Still feels like I'm fishing in the margins, to be honest. And I am fishing in the margins. But I can bait that range, and that's where the bites have been coming from. So if I had my 12-foot rods, I could fish further out. But this year I've decided, well, you know what? Leave the 12-footers at home. Do it with the 9s. And if that works, then I don't need my 12s, even on a big water like this. So what I'm not doing is I'm not casting to a clip. I'm not fishing spots. I'm fishing zones. And as long as each cast goes out in the zone, then I know I'm in the game. I've got the chance of a bite. Now normally for this type of fishing I would be using a 0.50 mono snag leader as a hook link. In this case I've chosen 0.45 mono because it's perfectly capable of staying tangle free when used with an inline lead at 90 yards. Now in previous testing I know that 0.45 is not quite robust enough when combined with a swivel based running lead system. This is why I normally go for 0.50 or even 0.60 with a swivel based system. But it turns out that you can actually reduce the mono diameter when using an inline lead because they stay more tangle free. There is absolutely no reason to be afraid of silt. Carp love silt. They feed in silt. There's lots of natural available food in silt. Fish in the silt. It's all good. It all works. But what you don't need to overcomplicate your silt fishing, even if you're fishing at long range and punching the lead into soft silt. You don't need fancy rigs, you don't need pop-ups, you don't need helicopter rigs, you don't need spinner rigs, you don't need anything like that. A bog standard, simple mono rig and a running inline lead correctly set up is all you need to be successful time and time again on any venue. I know it might sound crazy, but all I'm doing is casting these rigs as far as I can, stopping the lead just above the water, landing the rig, putting the rod on the alarms, sitting back, and I'm waiting for the magic to happen. I'm not casting to a spot, I'm not using distance sticks, I'm not clipping up, and I'm certainly not using a marker rod. It's a very free-form type of fishing. I use this technique a lot when I'm fishing large lakes but I'll also use it when I'm fishing open water on small estate lakes. I'm not looking for those tiny little dustbin sized spots. I'm fishing zones, I'm fishing large areas over a wide spread of bait. And I really don't care too much about what I land over. It could be firm silt, soft silt, it doesn't really matter. As long as it's out there at the distance that I need it to be, then I know I'm in with a good shout of a pickup. Carp are used to feeding in silt and they will dig aggressively for their food in the silt. So why not fish there? As long as I know I landed the rig, then I know I'm in with a chance of a bite. If your hook bait is good enough, trust me, the carp will find it. Now yes, of course, there's always going to be a time and a place for a marker rod, but on a big lake like this, it's just not a tool that I need or I use. When I fish a big lake, what I'm looking for is a zone that faces into the wind. Ideally, I'm looking for a southerly or southwesterly wind, but even on an easterly or a westerly wind, as long as you can put yourself into the wind and cast out directly into it, then you stand a good chance. The wind literally will bring the carp towards you. Marker rods are very useful on a small estate lake because they're going to help you to quickly find and identify those smaller spots that you might want to target much more accurately. But in that case, you're fishing spots rather than zones. It's a completely different style of fishing. Well, what an absolute cracker this is. To be super patient for this one. I launched the rigs out 11 hours ago and I've sat on my hands. 3 casts, half a kilo of bait over the top, and it's been absolute radio silence until a couple of beeps pulled up to the top and look what we got and caught. 32 pounds on the standard tactics. Super simple mono hair, running inline. There's no push over this venue. Fished here last year, this time of year, and I've literally been waiting all year for this one to come along, or this opportunity to come along really. 70 hectares, public, days only. Yeah, the French want to catch these fish just as badly as I do because they're absolutely stunning. Well, it's all kicking off here. I've just had back-to-back takes on the park lake today. Fantastic stuff. First one was 32. Don't think I'm going to weigh the second one. It's a small common. Might not even be 20, but they all count. They're all welcome in my book. Right, mate, wait your turn. I'll be with you in a second. He's a keen one. Whoa. Yeah, number 2's a little lively. He's only a little one, but big or small, we love them all. So these are the rigs that I was fishing with a few days ago, and each one of those did a bite. So these are all mono rigs that have been fished. They're completely ruined now. The hair's completely messed up like that. What I wanted to show you is that it's first time out with these new pre-lugged dumbbells, and 2 of the dumbbells got crushed off during the fight, which is not a real surprise, but this one was still intact. Good tough bait actually, did the job that I needed it to do. So all of these baits were in the water for about 11 hours, and it was 11 hours with absolute radio silence until each one of these bust off in sequence. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go through all of these rigs and inspect the hook. The hook link's completely done, so I just pull that off like that. Yeah, hook point is gone. It's only slightly blunt than it was out of the packet, but I wouldn't fish with it again without sharpening it, or you could just change it, of course. So that needs a little work. Now I can already feel on this one, I can see the point is bent up as well, so that's an absolute goner, that one. And this other one, yeah, same case with that. the hook point's bent to the left this time, so yeah, absolutely gone. These were out the packet sharp. I didn't sharpen these. They're the size 6 chod twisters, and this is not a hook that is designed for doing multiple captures. They are very sharp and they're designed to catch you one carp and then either be recycled or bent. So that's 2 for the bin, and then I can resharpen that one. So when I'm fishing mono rigs, this is the normal quantity of mono rigs that I head out with, 9 or 10, and it'll basically be one a chuck and or one a fish, so it depends how many recasts I have to make. In the case of the sessions last week, it was 3 casts, 3 fish, job done. So I only had 3 rigs to work on each time. That's the new board ready for my next session. So this is my long range silt setup. That's £15 Armourline in 0.35, and I've just tied a big loop on the end of it. So to make the inline leads quickly interchangeable, so we've got a 3.5 ounce inline distance, and I've taken out the plastic insert and I've replaced it with a dedicated inline lead insert. This is important, this bit, because I'm trying to smack this lead as hard as a 9 foot 3.5 pound rod will go, and if I use the tail rubber to do this that comes supplied with these leads, I found that they pull into the lead too hard. But these inline lead inserts, they've got a little step on them, and by using that it won't pull in too far, so it just stops it getting overdriven on the cast. And then I've got a little ring swivel on there, that works great. Ready-made solid bag leader, you can make these up, but it's just a 30cm long leader. The setup when I arrive is very simple. I just take the looper mono and I loop the whole lot through. This is why we've got a nice big, easy to work with looper mono, and I've just tied that with a non-slip mono loop knot, and then we loop to loop on the end. Now you might hate the fact that that looks all kind of tangled and bongly, but it really doesn't bother me in the slightest. It's good, strong stuff. And that's very quickly on arrival, takes me 3 seconds to loop on an inline lead system to the rod. You know, what you don't want to do, you don't want to be having a lead on the rod, banging around, ruining your carbon. A little setup like this just makes it quick and easy to interchange leads. It's the same setup that I'd use for solid PVA bag fishing. I'm not solid PVA bag fishing, but it works. There's a very specific reason why I've chosen 0.35 mono for this job. I'm trying to cast a 3.5 ounce lead a long way into silt, and I need a really strong material to do that. So this non-slip loop knot there, I've tested that to 14 pound breaking strain, so that's 95% of the rated strain. It's easy to do this knot too weakly. It can break at a few pound of force if you do a rubbish knot, but take your time, do it well, and it's a very strong material for that knot. Because it's only 0.35, that knot and this knot is really slim, and when you're fishing an inline lead, it's very important that the inline lead will just fly over those 2 knots. If I was to try and use an inline with a thick 0.50 mono leader, this knot would be too big, this knot would be too big, and this rig could become dangerous. So we don't want that. We want the inline lead to fly over those knots in the event of a mainline failure, which will mean that the rig is perfectly safe. It's quick, it's simple to set up, and uses a minimum amount of components. And as long as I stop the lead in flight and land the rig neatly on the water, I'm absolutely confident that I'm fishing and I'm going to get that bite. In 3-day sessions on this big French public lake, I've had 7 takes, I've landed 7 carp, 0 tangles, 0 hook pulls, and the best has been 40 pounds. Which is magic. And it doesn't worry me in the slightest that this rig was probably plugging into the silt. One of the carp that I caught, his head was so stained with brown that, you know, I could see that he'd been sticking his nose in that silt right up to his gill plates, a good 6 inch down into the silt. Brown stained lips, stained head. I've never seen the back of a carp's head actually stained up, but carp love silt and they will dig a long way to get their food. So all you need is a nice attractive bait and you'll catch them. Big old silt stain mouth, look. Look at that. I know that inline leads work great with supple braided rigs at short to medium range. I've been catching carp like that for years. But this time I really wanted to push inline leads to their limit. What can they do? And it turns out inlines are a great choice even at range, in situations where you wouldn't normally think that they can work. So here's how I've come up with this setup. The first thing you're going to need is an inline lead that's been optimised and designed for use at distance. This is not the place for a dumpy pair or a flat inline. You want something smooth, long, aerodynamic, something that's going to fly straight and true. In terms of lead size, you want to match lead size to the test curve of your rod. I'm using 3.5 pound 9-foot scopes, and a 3.5 ounce lead is a perfect match. If you've got 3 pound rods, then I would use a 3 ounce lead. That means that the system is in perfect balance. The waters I'm testing these rigs on are public and they're days only. This means I've got to rock up, get fishing quickly with no messing around. So to do that with inline leads, I want to put the lead on a short, solid PVA bag leader. By choosing a ready-made 30cm solid PVA bag leader, it means that they're quick to on-off the entire lead system. They're only 30 centimetres long. The longer the length of the leader that you're using, the more distance it's going to cost you. The leader isn't offering me anything in way of shock absorption. It's offering a little bit of flank protection for the fish, but it's principally there so I can quickly on and off the lead. For my main line, I've chosen to use 15 pound 0.35 Armourline. The reason why I've chosen this material is I can achieve a really small, neat and strong knot. And I need a really strong knot because this knot is going to come under an awful lot of force when I hit it as hard as I can. I'm trying to smack this lead out into a headwind as far out into these big lakes as possible. And as a rule of thumb, if you take the test curve of your rod, in my case 3.5 pound, you'll need a knot strength of 400% of that, or 4 times that. 4 times 3.5 is 14 pounds. So I really need a very strong knot to do this. And of course, I'm not just guessing that I'm using 15 pound line, therefore my knots are going to be okay. Every single knot is tested so that it is capable of doing the job I need it to do. If it's not, I'm going to be cracking off, and that's dangerous. How do you know if your lead is plugging, and why does it matter? So to demonstrate this, I've got a 3 ounce pair and I've just tied it onto the end of my leading rod. We've got some 30 pound braided leader there. I'm just going to cast that out. I'm going to cast it out into an area of lake that I know is fairly soft. I'm not going to feather it, I'm not going to control it, I'm just going to fire it into the water and then wind down and see what we got. Flick this out into a nice silty area. No control on the cast, we're just going to let it fly. Boom. Lovely. Just going to wind down, take the slack out, and I'm just going to tighten down to the lead, holding the rod up in the air like that, and I'm just going to gradually apply load to the tip. I can see the tip flexing down. I've moved the reel 2 centimetres and it's loading up, and I know that that lead is plugged. Just by doing that, that's already plugged. And I'm going to have to apply some more load. I'm using a 9-foot 3.5 pound scope here, so it's a fairly beefy rod. I can just start to feel the lead moving. There we go, it's moved, and yeah, it's fully unplugged. I had to move that lead about a foot at this end in order to get it out of the silt. So, you know, that was plugged at a decent way in. There's no way that you want to be fishing like that, no matter what rig you've got on, because it means that the lead is going to have towed your bait and your hook deep into that silt. It's not fishing. It's never going to be fishing. You're not going to catch a lot doing that. Now, that was a worst case scenario. It was a 3 ounce lead. There was no control, no feathering, no drag, no stopping the lead in flight. There was no rig, there was no bait, there was no PVA to slow this down at all. But this is the result. If you're fishing a lake with a big lead, a distance lead or pair lead, something like that, with a bait, maybe a small bait, and you're casting it out, and if you're not controlling that lead in flight as it enters the water, then if you're fishing into silt of a reasonable depth, then that rig is going to be disappearing and you really might be struggling for results. If that is you and you are struggling, then that's probably why you're struggling. Your rig is buried, the carp can't find it. So how do we fix that? So I'm going to use exactly the same setup. I've put a casting glove on because this is my leading rod and I'd like to keep some skin on the end of my finger. The first cast I'm going to do is I'm going to do a feather and then a trap just before the lead hits the surface of the water. And that is going to reduce the impact speed of the lead as it swings down and hits the silt. I'm then going to do the same plug test and see whether I fix the problem. Start to feather now, trap it, bump. Didn't quite feel the thud. That's a good 80 yards that's travelled, mind. We've got a bit of a crosswind there and it's quite shallow. So I added some control. I've taken the slack out of the line and I'm then going to load up the rod tip, and he's already moving. It's already moving. Yeah, he's just in the top layers of the silt. Yeah, no plugging. There was a little bit of drag on the lead, but it didn't plug. When I applied the force, you can tell when it's plugged because there's a sudden release of the rod tip. If the rod tip stays at a constant flex, and that constant flex depends on the nature of the silt. Silt varies a lot in terms of viscosity in depth, but if it just loads up and stays loaded up, then the lead didn't plug. So in this scenario, even just with a bare lead, no PVA, no rig, just by slowing the lead down as it arrives at its destination with some feathering, trapping the lead before it impacts the water, I've decelerated the lead enough to soften the impact on the silt. And this is the control mechanism that we use against lead plugging. So what is feathering? What am I actually doing? All I'm doing when the lead is in flight, I'm changing the position of this index finger and I'm moving it closer to the line. The line is going to be ripping off the spool like that. I'm just letting the line tick by my gloved finger and it'll go tick, 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 tick. It makes a little bit of a funny noise, and the closer my finger gets to the lip of that spool, the more drag I add to the line in flight. When I do the final trap, I close the distance off and the line goes round, it stops. That's the trapping action. But when I have a small gap between the spool and my finger, that's the feathering action. So I'm going to be casting the same distance, but I'm using a different lead with tubing, with a rig, and same size lead, but there is going to be a difference. The shape of the lead makes a big difference. This is a big flat pair, large amount of surface area, and this lead is going to fall through the water a lot slower. Yeah, you're going to have a little bit of extra deceleration effect from the rig, but a big part of the effect is the different shape of lead. Right, same line, same spot, same range. Gonna have to give it a bigger whack. Wrong. So there was no feathering at all. I'm going to wind down and we're going to see if that lead is plugged in any way. Take the slack out the line there, try and make contact with the lead, and no, the lead's gliding across the top. Wow. So even with no control, no nothing, no feathering, if you're fishing a silty water and you're struggling, your leads are plugging and you want a simple solution, change your lead shape. It's not just the lead size, it's the lead shape that makes a big difference. Go for something large and flat. A tri-lobe would be another option if you needed to use a swivel lead, but if you can use a big flat inline lead, then they float down really gently, land on the surface of the silt and basically refuse to plug. So the go-to solution for stopping leads from plugging has always been to use a helicopter rig. So why not just use a helicopter rig? Well, of course I've tested helicopter rigs and I've tested helicopter rigs against running rigs. And there are two problems when it comes to using helicopter rigs. So the first challenge you've got is where to set the top bead. If you're too conservative and set the top bead too high up the leader, then you haven't got a rig that hooks the carp very efficiently. They're going to find it pretty easy to spit that rig out time and time again. If you don't set the top bead high enough, there's a good chance that on the cast your lead is going to plug anyway, and it's going to pull that lead into the silt. Now, yes, with enough hours and enough practice and enough time, you can solve this problem, but it's very difficult to make this decision accurately first time, especially when you're a bit new to the sport. The other problem that I found when testing helicopter rigs against running rigs is that I absolutely have suffered more hook pulls on the helicopter rigs, especially with barbless. And even if you are using a micro barbed hooks, I've certainly seen customers suffer more hook pulls using a helicopter setup versus a running rig setup. So how can I be so confident that running rigs are all you need even when you're fishing in silt? Well, I've basically only fished with running rigs for the last 15 years. I've cast them at short range, long range, from a boat, bait boat, and time again, all I need is a running rig, and it's always the best solution. The only tweak I have to make to get a running rig to work in silt, especially when I'm casting it at long range, is I will have to use a thicker monofilament. I might have to go to 0.50 or even 0.60 just to get the anti-tangle resistance I need on that running rig in flight. So if you're worried about your lead plugging deeply into the silt, should you always feather the cast? Well, for me, no. Trapping or casting to a clip is far more important than the actual feathering itself. Feathering is a way of controlling the distance that you've actually cast. If you cast with the perfect amount of force and speed, then the lead is going to arrive at your spot with a perfect velocity so that you can just kiss the clip or trap the lead instantly, and the lead will land softly on the water and float down. Feathering is like a brake. It gives you more room for error. It means that you can cast hard enough and then a little bit more, so that if you overshoot that cast, you can just slow it down just a little bit to bring it in on target so that it arrives over the spot, kisses the clip, plops in the water with as little disturbance as possible. For me, feathering just by itself without the trapping of the lead doesn't form a part of my fishing. It doesn't do enough to control the entry of the lead into the water. Yes, it helps me control distance, but it's still not going to get that rig to flip, turn and land nicely. It's also not going to help me maintain contact with the lead as it falls through the water and touches softly down on the silt. Whether you use feathering or feathering and trapping or casting to a clip, a lot of that depends on what sort of fishing that you're doing. If I'm going down a big reservoir and punching lead as hard as I can into a big southerly wind, then I don't feather, I don't trap, I just whack it out there as hard as I can, wait until I hear the lead smack into the water, and then I close the bail arm, wind down to get the bow out of the line because there's always a lot of wind about. And then if I'm lucky, if there's enough depth of water, I might catch up with the lead, tighten the line and feel a bit of a thud when it impacts the silt. It's a completely different style of fishing. So in that scenario, the only control I have for the speed of impact of the lead on the silt is the size and shape and weight of the lead and the amount of drag I've got on the hook bait, whether I'm fishing with a PVA stick, whether I'm fishing with a 12mm bait or double 24mm baits. There are other benefits that come from trapping the lead or casting accurately to a clip. One of the biggest ones for me is the fact that it makes the rig turn over in flight. So in flight, it's the lead that's going to be travelling first and the bait is going to be following. This is how a rig like this actually casts. When you trap the lead, or the lead hits the clip, the line tightens, the lead decelerates, i.e. it stops travelling forward. This bait has inertia and that inertia swings it forward like that, keeping the hook link straight, and then the lead and the hook bait land like that on the water. It doesn't matter whether you're trapping the lead or casting to a clip. What you're doing is the lead is travelling in flight, it's arriving at the destination. This is the moment of kissing the clip or the line being trapped. The hook link is straightened and then the rig travels forward and then the hook bait and the lead fall on the surface of the water together as a pair. It's a really effective way of reducing tangles, and in certain situations it enables me to use rigs that are quite tangle prone in situations that you wouldn't normally be able to use them, because I can get the lead and the hookbait to separate in flight and land perfectly. So you need to think of feathering in terms of it's a way of controlling the speed and the distance which a lead travels in flight. Trapping is the actual process we use to stop the forward travel of the lead, land it delicately and discreetly on the surface of the water. It also reduces tangles, and it helps us to maintain contact with the lead as it's falling through the water, and it will land with the minimum velocity possible on the silt, given any rig and bait configuration. Something else to bear in mind is that the fishing line that you're using, and whether you're using a leader or not, has an impact. A thin line tied to a lead will travel through the water quicker than a thick line tied to a lead will travel, if we say that lead is the same size and shape. So one of the things that I do when I'm fishing really big reservoirs is that I use at least 5 metres of 0.50 or maybe 0.60 mono leader. Now, I do need this leader to absorb the shock of the cast, and I need it for abrasion resistance as well. I could use a braided leader, but I'd rather use a heavy duty mono snag leader because it's thicker, and a thicker leader means that the lead is hitting the silt with a lower velocity, and that reduces plugging. So there are lots of factors at play. My go-to approach would always be to stop the lead in flight or to cast to a clip. That's not always going to be possible, especially when you start fishing at longer range. So you need to fix other problems. You need to use a very anti-tangle rig, and that rig needs to be able to fire into the water with no control at your end whatsoever, sort itself out and land with a lower velocity as possible when it impacts the silt. Every situation is a little bit different, but if I can feel that thud, even if it's just a soft thud, then I'm very confident that my rig is presented tangle free, I'm fishing effectively, and there's a very good chance that I'm going to get a pickup.